you so much for joining us for Millennium Tonight program right here on Millennium Television. Now, do remember that this program is live on the Millennium Television Zambia Facebook page. We are also live on Topstar Channel 95, and also we are live on our Daily Nation Facebook page. Now, we are still remembering and mourning the death of former president, the 60th Republican President Edgar Chagwa Lungu, who died on the 5th of June 2025 in South Africa. Now, in remembering him, on this edition of Millennium Tonight, I'm featuring Honorable Chisanga, who is Lukansha MP, and let me get to welcome him to the program. Good evening, sir.
So grateful for the opportunity to come and speak to the people on your television at the time when you're mourning the passing of the 60th Republican President and the leader of the Tonse Islands.
Great.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak up.
So much. Viewers, you'll also be given a chance to come through live on the program, as the number will be shown on the screen and you'll be calling that number. Do remember to be brief to the point, even as you are coming through, to contribute on the program. I am your host. My name is Ruben Monza, and we'll be together until the end of the program. But now let's talk about how you met, the first time you met the former president, Edgar Chagwa Lungu, and the experience that you had the first time you met him. Okay.
Because it's the first time I'm dating the press through your media, allow me to first convey the words of condolences to the first family, Mrs. Esther Lungu, our mother, Honorable Tasira Lungu, and the siblings, the greater family of Dr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu, and also the family of Patriotic Front and the Tonse Alliance, and of course to the population of the Republic of Zambia. This is an individual that wrested the opportunity to be the president of this country and served the country for 7 years. It's a sad loss, but like everybody that has spoken has said, let's mourn this man with dignity, let's mourn him with respect, and let his death, if it is at all possible, let his death unite the nation rather than divide it. So my sincere condolences, Mama Esther. Coming to how I met Dr. Lungu, my association with the late Republican president goes far back beyond even politics. I encountered him first sometime in July 1993. I was just a young man of, I think, 26, 27 years at that time, when I was called to the bar as a lawyer in Zambia. And of course, I needed to start, like any other person, I needed to start looking around for mentors. Dr. Lungu then was the one managing a firm of lawyers called Andrea Masia and Company, and a firm called DH Kemp and Company. Our building, our firm was in Chester House along Cairo Road, and his firm was in Nkwazi House across Cairo Road. So we were very interactive because one of my managing partners at the practice then, Mr. Justice Albert Wood, who recently retired from the Supreme Court as a judge, was then managing partner and was a very close friend of Dr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu. So I became one of these young men that were immediately attracted to the intelligence and aura around Dr. Edgar Lungu, and I associated with him very closely from that time until the time that he became Republican president.
Great. I can actually tell that you come a long way with the former president, Edgar Chagwa Lungu.
We do, yes.
That's great. That's great. Now, how would you remember him, as a person, away from the public role that he played, as a lawyer, as an MP, and as a minister, and eventually a president?
As an individual, Dr. Lungu was a very affable individual. I mean, he's a person who would always create energy. Whenever you are talking to him, he would create energy when he springs up at a place where you are. I mean, at the early years as practicing lawyers, there were certain associations that we were having. Sometimes you want to mingle at some bar, or you want to mingle at some other place where you're just having, public activity, including the annual general meetings for the Law Association of Zambia at that time. And we had two sessions. We had two places where we would have AGMs that time. If we had an AGM this year in Lusaka, we would have one in Ndola on the Copper Belt. But every time Dr. Lungu, Mr. Lungu then walked into the area where you are having, the AGM, or where you're mingling around the AGM activities, he would quickly, introduce some form of energy in terms of dealing with him. He cracks jokes, he reminds you of all things, he talks about some intelligent cases he was involved in. He always just wanted to be the guy that you wanted to listen to if he is around. So I remember him as a very exciting individual. I remember him as a very funny and witty fellow. But most importantly, I remember him, as a very, very, very intelligent individual. And I think his classmates who worked with him to school and some of the people that worked closely with him in the practice of law would attest to that. When it comes to political life, I think we started our journey from completely different angles. The information I have gathered is that he actually started his political career with the United Party for National Development. And later on when the Patriotic Front was formed, he was one of the very few that enlisted for the Patriotic Front way back in 2001. On my part, I had started my political career, with Dr. Nevas Mumba. We formed an organization called the National Christian Coalition back in 1997. In fact, interestingly, in 1997, we had an annual general meeting in Lusaka, and Dr. Lungu then was a member of the Council of the Law Association of Zambia. It was the first time I encountered the founding president of the UPND, Mr. Anderson Mazoka, because he had been invited to come and give a keynote speech to the AGM at that time. It was a very unique experience because, to start with, it was very rare at that time that you could call a president of the opposition political party, and possibly the only time that it happened, to come and speak to the meeting of lawyers. It was a brevity of the Council of the Law Association of Zambia, in which Dr. Lungu belonged, and which was chaired by George Kunda. That bravely invited Mr. Anderson Mazoka to come and speak to the profession. At that time, I was privileged as a very young lawyer to be given the opportunity to move a vote of thanks to Mr. Mazoka's speech. And after that, we retreated, to the holding room where Mr. Mazoka had been kept. And we had a very nice discussion with him regarding leadership and the future of the nation. At that time, Mr. Lungu had not enlisted himself for any political position. But I think he also got this very attraction that I got. And later I discovered he had joined the UPND. But in 2001, like I said, he moved on and started working with Mr. Michael Sata. He contested Chawama, but in 2001 he wasn't actually allowed to contest. And interestingly, I contested myself in 2001 in another constituency in Matero. And he was supposed to have contested Chawama under the UPND. But he was under the Patriotic Front, but he was moved off. And they allowed somebody else to contest. In 2006. In 2001, he didn't contest. I think he contested independent and lost. But in 2006, he wasn't allowed to contest because they asked Reverend Sampa Brett to be the one to contest the elections. And she won on the Patriotic Front ticket, because at that time, Patriotic Front had gone into league with PUDD. And then we then allowed Reverend Sampa Brett to be the one to contest, and she won that election. Unfortunately, there was a fallout between her and Vasata. And Vasata then asked Edgar Lungu. If you've seen one of the clips that is going around, where Vasata was actually apologizing to Dr. Edgar Lungu for having delayed his arrival into leadership as a member of parliament. It was purely because of those experiences. And Vasata then felt, look, this is a young man I can trust. Let me just publicly apologize to him for having delayed him, for not having allowed him to participate in the political process before. And lo and behold, in 2011, he was allowed to contest the election. In that year, I had already joined the Patriotic Front, and I was working with him, because I came back from where I'd gone out of the country in 2005, 2006, and I enlisted for the Patriotic Front. Prepared myself to contest a constituency that we identified with the help of Mr. Sata, because by the time I came back, Matera had already been taken by another member who was vying to contest. So I was then introduced to Lukasha constituency in 2006 by Vasata, and by 2011 I was ready to contest Lukasha constituency. He was contesting Chawama. I suffered the same fate where I was pulled out of Lukasha constituency in preference to the MP who was sitting, and in fairness I agreed that this is the best that we could have done that time. So we went into parliament as a member of parliament. And if you remember, in the first cabinet that Vasata introduced, he was a junior minister. He was actually a deputy minister, but very quickly Vasata identified him as somebody that he could be entrusted with a senior portfolio, and he became minister, and unfortunately, Vasata started ailing, and the party was still beleaguered with problems. He decided to identify a leadership that was going to survive him, and leadership that was going to drive the political party forward in terms of creating the future of the Patriotic Front. And at that time, again, Dr. Lungu was identified as the front runner. And what Vasata then managed to do was allocate to him various portfolios as a way of trying to show the whole leadership of the Patriotic Front that, look, this is a man that I'm prepared to entrust with these responsibilities, means you can build trust with him. So all the members of parliament then and all the senior leadership of the Patriotic Front at that time, they identified him as a potential successor to Vasata. And that's why, if you notice, his succession was not the most controversial of successions, because already it had been indicated or pointed out to the people that this is the person who Vasata would want to succeed him in the event anything like what happened to Vasata actually happened.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. What moments from his tenure in office actually stood out for him, for you actually? Because I know that you've talked about him being a deputy minister.
Yes.
And I know that you didn't anticipate that he was one day going to become president.
Absolutely. You know, I always chuckle about what happened one time in 2013 or 24, not 2013 actually. We had an AGM as the Lower Session of Zambia, and we had invited, I think, as guest of honor, Minister of Justice then, Mr. Winter Kavimba, State Council. You know, and ideally we needed to handle protocol in a particular fashion. The guest of honor who had come to the meeting would be the responsibility of the president of the Lower Session of Zambia, then James Banda. I was his vice president, and naturally I was to handle the next most important person in the protocol. And at that time, Dr. Lungu had already been elevated to senior portfolio. He was a minister of home affairs. So he became my responsibility in terms of protocol. That meant I had to take care of him. If he wanted refreshments, I was responsible for it. If he wanted a drink, I was responsible for it. Whatever he was going to eat, I was working around that. So we gathered around together with himself and Mrs. Lungu at that time. We went where I decided, look, it was getting a bit hot where we were sitting in the annual general meeting. I said, let's go and sit outside. So we left the Avani, it was then the Sun Hotel. We left the Avani and went and sat at the poolside with him and a few other young lawyers that had also become attracted to him. So we were sitting and having, you know, a chat, snacks and drinks. So I looked at him and I said, Minister, do you realize that you are destined a higher office than where you are right now?
You told him that?
I actually told him that. The wife remembers after that. Then he looked at me and said, what are you saying? I said, look, I'm just telling you the truth. I've got this very strong urge to tell you that you are destined for a higher office than this. And he laughs and said, no, George, look, this is not for us to discuss here.
But how did you know that was destined
I jokingly
for a higher office?
I jokingly said to him, because I noticed, I was PF. I noticed PF had gone into a gear of confrontation among its leaders. There was very huge contestation among its leadership. I think everybody had started realizing that Vasada was aiding. Okay, so in my intuition, when I noticed how Vasada was dealing with Edgar Lungu, and also we did have some moments of speaking with Vasada on how, you know, to build leadership. You know, other things that we discussed, I can't disclose them here, but I started getting a strong feeling that he had earmarked him for a topper position, a higher position. So I told him that he like brushed it aside, and then I told the wife, I said, look, I am making what is called the Joseph Declaration, that this man is going to be in a higher office, and I will ask you as his wife, he should not forget the people that help him to get to the higher office. And that was a joke that we had. So later we come and joked about it. Okay, but what I remember very much in his presidency is that it was as controversial as anybody could imagine. You know, firstly, what you heard were voices of rejection within the Patriotic Front, at least within the top leadership, because the thinking was that he would not be the right person to the party going forward, because groups had already been formed within the party. So he remained isolated. There's a picture that people had started displaying before, when they showed them sitting on the grass, you know, at Mulungushi Rock of Authority. And if you saw that picture, you'd actually see a very isolated Edgar Lungu sitting in there.
I saw that picture.
Everybody's thinking, this guy can't make it. You know,
He was actually sitting down.
he was actually on the ground, on the grass, and others were sitting on chairs.
Yes.
And you know, everybody, the thinking then was that this guy is too raw. He can't actually row this boat, taking it forward. Now, what that meant was that it started creating opinions within the political party of how do we then handle this transition. Okay, and the thinking by many people at that time now had become, okay, can we think about what was thought? Because remember, by the time President Lungu was sitting down, he had already become Minister of Defense, Minister of Justice, Minister of Home Affairs, Chairman of the Disciplinary Committee for the Patriotic Front, Secretary, Acting Secretary General. He had all these portfolios lumbered upon him by elect. So the thinking by everybody was that there's a reason why this position was given to him. So the contest now shifted to, would these groups that were contesting for leadership unite and create a candidate and fight this individual? And how was this individual going to respond to it? But then what you saw immediately was that, especially for members of parliament, they thought, this is our man. So they went in, embraced him, and naturally it means the cadre of the Patriotic Front now felt and a leader has been identified. And they started, working with him from that time onwards. To the extent where for them, the convention then was just a formality because the late leader had already pointed them a direction where they were going to take these things. You saw that issue that arose with Mao Sampa doing the other thing and then coming to court and doing a consent order way, because their resolution was that this is the man who was going to lead us. And when he contested the 2015 election, at least during that time, he still had a few of those of the senior members who had wanted to contest against him, who had accepted that he is the man who they were going to field in 2015. Others, of course, did not do it. So they pushed that agenda. I must say, at that time, I wasn't within the top leadership of Patriotic Front because I had gotten into an engagement with Winter Kavimba before the passing of Michael Sata, where I told him that I thought I needed to take a break from active politics because I was bidding to become president of the Royal Association of Zambia, and I had become the last president at that time. So I was on the outside, but viewing what was going on, and in that contest, there was then so many issues that arose, including, whether he should act as president when Sata had died. And the opinion that had formed in there was that he should actually act as president, because Sata, according to everybody, had pointed out to him as president. And one thing that the Patriotic Front at that time did, which I thought was very decent, was that they sought an opinion of the Royal Association of Zambia on whether Dr. Lungu should continue to act as president, before the convention, before the general election. And the constitutional imperative even at that time was that if the president dies, the vice president was going to act. Okay, and the contention that then arose was that this individual called Guy Scott, even if he was vice president, he was not eligible to act, as president. And that's why, according to them, Masata, whenever he traveled, he pointed at somebody else to be acting president and everything. Yeah. So the story that came around now was that when an opinion was sought from the profession, before we were able to author an opinion,
as lawyers?
Yes, as lawyers of Zambia. The watchdog then authored some crazy opinion, and they purported that I'm the one, as president of LASU, had signed that opinion, where I was saying, no, Edgar should actually be failed because of what he's doing is treason and stuff. It was just all this crap that went into that opinion. But we then quickly wrote a note saying, no, actually we didn't author that opinion. LASU was still considering the request and we were going to come back with an opinion. And subsequently we came up with an opinion where we actually advised them that under the Constitution, when a sitting president dies in office, the vice president becomes the acting president until the by-election to elect a new takes place. And we authored that opinion, sent a copy to Guy Scott, acting president, and naturally it was circulated. So when it arrived at the table of Dr. Lungu, he called me. Because at that time he hadn't even handed over. Because he had remained acting president when Sata went. And he called me. There is, President, are you the one who authored this opinion? I said, yes, I authored it in consultation with the profession. I authored it in consultation with State Council, who were basically the INABA. And I knew that the lawyer in him was going to respect the opinion coming from the profession. Yeah. And then he asked
obviously
me...
coming from the last president.
Yes. Yeah. Then he asked me, has your council considered the ramification of giving us this opinion? And I said, look, our responsibility ended with just telling you what law was. The ramifications are supposed to be things you can manage yourselves, but I take the view strongly that you, being a member of the profession, you respect what your profession has advised. And he laughed. And as usual, says, look, my younger brother, I know you always mean well, okay? I'm going to do as you have advised. I'm going to call a meeting and I'm going to hand over to thing. Then, something that's moved in me. I said, you know what? For me, you don't have to worry about it. This leadership is coming. Okay, this is just going to be a transitional period, but quite frankly, people have already been pointed to where this is, and we laughed about it and it passed. From that, I learned that I was dealing with not only a politician, not only an individual, not only a lawyer, not only a leader, but a combination of all these things. I was dealing with somebody who was advisable. I was dealing with somebody who would take on board the advice given by somebody who is competent and act on it. And my respect and admiration for him just grew because I felt this is what a president is. And quickly he called that cabinet meeting and he handed over the instruments of power to Guy Scott. Okay, and to everybody's shock in the nation, the first thing Guy Scott tried to do was suspend him as a member of the Patriotic Front and the Secretary General of the party. And for me, that's where hell broke loose. Because now everybody knew that he actually announced that if I'm elected, I'll make sure we have the Constitution. And when he was elected, that was the first thing that he did. And he said, because of the time that we have the next election, we may not have a complete election. Remember we were sitting with what is called the People's Draft at that time. We had already done the constitutional work as a nation. Under the oversight of President Michael Sata and the Winter Kavimba as Minister of Justice, we had gone all over the place and collected everything that we had in our constitutional literature and put up what was called a People's Draft. That is what ought to have been passed as a constitution in 2014. But unfortunately, it went missing, etc., etc. But when President Lungu was elected, he re-embarked on that journey again. But of course, cutting necessary shortcuts so that we can come up with a constitution before the election of 2016. The hard work that he put in, the journey that already had a manifesto, which is why if you remember when they asked him, what is your vision? He jokingly said, well, I'm committed of making sure that we protect this constitution, which is why I'm surprised that today we are dealing with proposals to amend the constitution that are not in keeping with how you amend constitutions. And people are sitting back holding their hands, standing akimbo and watching what the government is doing. We have a duty as citizens to protect this constitution in the way it was enacted. So when we see a government beginning to suggest amendments to the constitution that are not in keeping with how you proceed in the amendment, we should be able to stand up and say, we are going to defend the constitution. This constitution has another very exciting clause that says when you are interpreting this constitution, because it is written in very basic language, it's got a clause that says when you're interpreting this constitution, including when the courts themselves are interpreting the constitution, they are entreated to use what is called common sense. You must utilize common sense, to come up with what you think the constitutional imperative is as contained in Act number 2 of 2016. Which is why when I came here the other time, I was making a comparison between what the Constitutional Court did when they were deciding the case of Danny Pule versus the Attorney General. Talk about the tenure of Edgar Chagwa Lungu, and then what the court came to do in the case of Chizombe versus the Attorney General when talking about whether Edgar Lungu should be eligible for 2026. I drew those comparisons, and for me, employing common sense, I said that the Danny Pule case was much more well-reasoned in terms of interpreting the Constitution and the constitutional orders that took place, that existed before 2016 and after 2016. I argued, and I can justify it, that when the Constitutional Court was confronted with the same case in Chizombe, they literally were falling all over themselves. They literally did not reason, because for them, the focus was to eliminate the participation of Edgar Lungu from the 2026 election. And my assessment was that the Danny Pule case sounds much more intelligent when you compare it with the Chizombe case. But that's an issue that we can debate with somebody who wants to argue a different view. But my point here is that we came up with a constitutional order that is very simple to interpret, that is very simple to understand, but most importantly, which was designed to make the delivery of government services very simplified. Unfortunately, we seem not to be doing that, but that's one of an area where I think that Edgar Lungu scored highest in my assessment. Come to the government infrastructure, public infrastructure, and basically the infrastructure program that Michael Sata had campaigned on. Remember, when PF was formed, The design was that Michael Sata had argued that in this country, the biggest challenge we've had is not disease. The biggest challenge we have is not education. But the biggest challenge that we have is a divide between the rich and the poor. So when he got around crafting the Patriotic Front, first as a political party, secondly as his manifesto, and thirdly collecting people that he wanted to work with. If you saw Asata when he formed this party, he identified political giants in the country and brought them around himself. If you talk about Wachenda, talk about Winter Kabimba himself, we talk about Paul Lumbi, talk about Wamwansaka Peya, talk about Mr. Mbuzi from Eastern Province who passed on, talk about Wabina herself, talk about Edgar Lungu and everybody else that took in, including the one who's acting president now, Winter Kabimba, and several other people, including ourselves. He assembled a team that needed to understand the idea of what the Patriotic Front is. And that idea was that this is a party that seeks to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, because that's the only first step you have to take in developing any society. So the thinking around the Patriotic Front ideal is that we will try and bridge the gap between the rich and the poor. And how do you do it? You introduce a culture of infrastructure development countrywide. And that's why when Basata came into power, the first thing he tried to do was to implement what he had in his head. For the past 50 years that he's been in politics, he actually would come and he would sit us down and lecture us on how, because of the fear of the other leaders who were there before, we have not opened up this country, because everybody was thinking that what was being designed was impossible to achieve. So he had come to prove that we can design a program, you can implement it, and it's possible to achieve it. And I will go, I will edge with this thinking that the presidency of Vasata, and by extension the presence of Edgar Lungu, is one clear demonstration that it's possible for somebody to be in the office of a president and to dream big and to implement those big dreams and be followed.
Speaking of implementing big dreams,
yes,
let's talk about some infrastructure projects that you feel had a lasting impact or a lasting standing on the people out there. What projects would you point out to say, okay, this one I think he really scored?
The best one to look at is the Kazungula Bridge. You've seen what the Kazungula Bridge has done, not only to Zambia, but to SADC itself. You can say that the man scored. Of course, there were challenges of financing, but innovation was utilized to ensure that the bridge is completed and the bridge comes to fruition. Before the Kazungula Bridge was constructed, it took you 4 or 5 days to cross the Zambezi River if you're going into Botswana all the way to South Africa, and vice versa, so that the movement of goods and services amongst the countries in that region were actually slowed down, in a big way. But when the Kazungula Bridge was opened, you can see what is happening there. Firstly, it's a money spinner itself, and if you heard President Hakainde Hichilema when he was addressing, I think, the judges or some grouping in Livingstone, he acknowledged that this is a marvel of a project, that this project actually has paid itself through, that even the loan that was committed to construct it has been repaid in record time. For me, this is where what was a dream and is implemented, and as big as it is, it can show that you can actually recoup it. And that's why we became very ambitious ourselves, who followed Michael Sata and who followed Edgar Lungu, that this country, what is lacking even today, and I argue this point with force, even today what is lacking in this country is infrastructure. If we put up infrastructure that is required for other economic activities in this country, we can actually develop, we can propel this country to be a medium income earning country from a poor country that it is right now. If you opened up the roads, I can even use an example of what we did. The World Bank project that we did in rural roads in Kasama, in my constituency, for instance, in Malolo constituency, and a few other constituencies, even in Southern Province, it opened up the areas for agriculture. I can use my example of Lukasha constituency. The furthest point from the center of Kasama is about 290 kilometers. And that used to be serviced by paths. But over that area is where you find most small-scale farmers who produce huge volumes of maize. But they never had chances to bring those maize in good time to the center for it to be collected by FRA. So when PF was in power, under the leadership of Edgar Lungu, we split the project. In the southern province, we financed the construction of Kazungula Bridge, which, by the way, was more expensive than any other road project that we did in the country. The bridge itself alone was extremely expensive. But elsewhere, we opened up the country by doing roads, including what are called rural roads. These are roads that are not tarmac roads, but they are proper all-weather gravel roads that can be passed even by bigger trucks, even in the rainy season. That grew the agricultural potential in the areas, which is why you have been hearing that the agriculture, the food basket is now moving to the north. It is because of the policies that were designed by the Patriotic Fund, implemented under the leadership of Edgar Chagwa. But unfortunately, you see, these projects were terminated when the UPND came into power. So instead of building our capacity or our potential to make sure that agricultural production is maximized, it is now stagnating, because if you can't have additional roads being constructed in those areas, the farmers who are growing will still have difficulties bringing the produce to the center. So my thinking is that even the government that took over after us, and Wawina mentioned that when she was trying to eulogize Edgar Chagwa, she was saying the difficulty that we have in this country is that every government that comes into power after the other one would like to change everything that the previous government was doing, begin to implement a completely new rule book on how to develop the country.
What's the disadvantage of that?
Development is supposed to be continued. That's why we've got these, sustainable development goals by the UN, which we implement international development goals and to government development goals. You should not depart radically from what your friends were doing if you're going to achieve anything in terms of developing the nation. Because development is not an overnight success. It has to take place over a long period of time. I'll give an example of the mines. The mines had started stressing under the Patriotic Fund. But when the investigations were carried out, we just discovered that those stresses were not stresses, for lack of a better term. They were actually design stresses. The idea was to make sure that the mines continue making losses when the investors are making money out of the mines. Okay, and when, there was no agreement between, for instance, Vedanta, which is KCM, and the government, what the government of Edgar Chagwa did was just seize that mine. And for me, that is an expression of sovereignty. You can't allow a scenario where miners come here and begin to dictate on you how they're going to invest in their mines. No. In mining, and I always debate this in Parliament, in mining industry now, there's a new principle called the principle of shared value. Where you understand that any investment that is going to come into a country in mining is going to be done at par. The locals must get a benefit, or the host government, which is ourselves, must get a benefit, sizable benefit, and the investors must get a benefit. And for me, benefit is not taxes. Taxes are universal. Every country, every government has got a mandate to tax, but we must get something more under the principle of shared value with the mining investor that comes in. And when you notice that KCM was playing tricks with governments, Edgar Chagwa government decided to seize KCM, and it was being managed by the liquidator. People have not accepted this position. But that mine, while being managed by a liquidator, was able to get into production. The contractors were being paid. The minerals were being produced, and exports were taking place under that liquidation that was in there. When the UPND came back, they reversed the liquidation. And see, the reversed is in the most unfortunate way. Firstly, they said, okay, the liquidation was being designed to just pay off people, like Edgar Lungu and his friends, which has never been proved up to now. Secondly, when they took over the mine, questions started arising. We even asked in Parliament, what next for the mine? What did they do? They told us, we're not going to bring back Vedanta, but Vedanta has come back. That's all the discussion for today. But I wanted to explain to you that Edgar was a very bold leader. When he noticed that some things were not going on right, he took decisive steps. That's why those who were around him started calling him Mr. Walk the Talk. Whatever he said, he did. When he noticed that the mines were stressing, he grabbed the mine. What we just needed to do was now redesign the mining policy, investment policies, find suitable investors, bring them in on the principle of shared value, and move forward. Unfortunately, that wasn't to happen because in 2021, we lost the election and handed over.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Dear viewers, in case you're just tuning in, this is Millennium Tonight. I'm hosting Honorable George Chisanga, who is a Lukansha MP, and we are remembering, the life of ECL, former president, 60th Republican president of Zambia, Edgar Chagwa Lungu. You can also be part of the program. You can call the number that is showing on the screen right now and be part of the program by bringing in your contributions, comments, or questions live on this here program. So, Honorable Chisanga, what lessons does his presidency hold in today's generation or the next generation of leaders that we're going to have in Zambia?
To be fair, we probably need to discuss also whether there were failures. that occurred under presidents.
We'll get to that, but for now, let's talk about the lessons that his presidency holds.
Okay, in my assessment, the lessons are that it doesn't matter where you come from. If God has got grace for you, and if you are focused on what you want to achieve, anything is possible. When Edgar Lungu, I think, went into politics, the thinking was that maybe he was going to save the people of Chawama as member of parliament, possibly assist Mr. to run government. But God had his own plans. He understood the potential the man had. Of course, he's gifted with intelligence, and an opportunity came, he seized it. But he performed to the best of his ability. So I think the endearing lesson he leaves everybody is that, for me, where you start your journey doesn't matter as much as where your journey is going to end. With determination, with wit and with good intentions, you are able to aspire and achieve the greatest potential that you have in you. That's who Dr. Edgar Lungu, for me, personifies.
Let's talk about the failures, like you mentioned. That's a great point there.
Yes.
I know that there could be some failures that you noticed yourself, or maybe the Zambian people noticed out there. And one of the things that was being talked about much was the levels of cadreism under his leadership.
Yes.
Do you feel like he failed to control the high levels of cadreism under his leadership?
Well, to the contrary, I do not feel that. I have always been arguing that I need maybe another 2 hours on a station like this one to tell you why I hold this view. But I can summarize it.
Yes.
For you to understand the phenomena of cadreism in this country, you must look at the history of our politics. Okay, there has always been the tendency in this country by politicians who are ruling to surround themselves with a group of people that are prepared to die for that leadership. And this did not start with Edgar Lungu. Anybody who has read the history of politics in Zambia will know that that's what resulted in Kapwepo's political career to come to an end. That is what resulted in Wankumbula's political career to come to an end. And by extension, that is what possibly prevented people like Vijay Mwanga from becoming president of this republic, people like Mr. Wina from becoming president of this republic, people like Mr. Mwanawasa, Mr. Wira Mungomba, and other, not Mr. Mwanakatwe and Mr. Wira Mungomba, and other very prominent politicians who had worked around Kaunda. But it was because even Kaunda himself had been surrounded by cadres. But if you wanted to understand that, you needed to understand the inside of the politics that you need. When you came to MMD, you find that this problem, it reproduced itself. Dr. Chirwa came under a very popular acclaim and became the president. Okay, but by the time we were getting to 1997, his popularity had so waned that he could only protect it using, cadres. And if you saw then what happened, Dr. Chirwa then had these young boys and girls that goes and said, we're going to sponsor him for a third term. Okay, and that group became so big, and it could not be managed by the political establishment at that time. Because for them, they had grabbed Dr. Chirwa and felt we can send this man to State House in 2001. And the agenda started in 1997, just after the elections. There was so much blood within MMD. But Chirwa was always protected by cadres. And that's when cadreism actually, re-emerged on the political scene. When Mwanawasa won, he tried to quell cadreism. If you heard, Mwanawasa was very forceful against cadreism. But unfortunately, because that seed had been planted, all you needed was a political establishment to reorganize itself. So those who felt disillusioned under Mwanawasa are the ones who gravitated into the Patriotic Front and surrounded themselves on Mr. Sata. I had made a point earlier on that Edgar Lungu had a choice to survive. And those who seemed to have sponsored him were thinking they could control him. But cadres also felt they could own him. So in the fight that then ensued on the leadership of the Patriotic Front, Edgar found himself as a friend of the cadre, much more than a friend of the people that had sponsored him. That's why if you notice there was a fallout amongst many senior political players in the Patriotic Front. But that is not to say there was no failure. I think that as a leader he should have taken decisive steps to control the cadres earlier than later. But for a man who had to weather the fights that he had to engage in to get to ascend to the top leadership, I think he fared quite well in terms of trying to control the cadres. And if you heard towards 2020, 2021, he had started, he had actually started cracking his whip on cadreism. At least he had started showing that he was not impressed with how the cadres had taken center stage over politics. And he also demonstrated it when it came to adoptions of 2021. Without mentioning names, you can see that he had tried to move himself as far away from cadres as possible, because his thinking was that if we won 2021, for instance, he would then be able to redesign the politics of Patriotic Front to make sure that leadership is respected. Cadres become followers of leaders rather than the ones who are in front of leaders. This is a scenario where you used to see cadres harassing, elected members of parliament. Why? Because they had become so powerful. And it was all because of what had happened at the succession between Vasat and Edgar Lungu. But that for me was a failure of leadership. We needed to accept that was a failure of leadership. And I think in the report that was authored after we lost the election, this is pointed out as one of the failures that sustained the Patriotic Front.
Do you think that failure to control the high levels of cadreism actually led to former President Edgar Lungu losing elections in 2021?
It contributed very massively to the loss of 2021, as reported in the post-mortem report that was prepared. But the problem with cadres in Zambia, it will need intelligence to manage it, believe it or not, because I don't even think that the UPND currently is able to argue successfully that they've ended cadreism. It can't. I've demonstrated that before. I've shown people where cadreism is taking place. And for me, unfortunately, the cadreism by the end of the UPND, some of it is even well organized in such a way that you can't see it as cadreism, but it's actually, it is what it is. Okay, but it will take, we need to get into politics that can assist us to address this issue of cadreism. But it takes a lot of intelligence, it takes a lot of research, it takes a lot of recommendations, and it also takes a lot of what is called political diversion. You see, the misfortune with our country is that there's very little economic activities that is supposed to be done. Politics is the most lucrative business that we've got right now in the country.
Which is unfortunate.
Well, it's extremely unfortunate because they say economy can drive itself without independent of politics. But it takes leadership to make that decision. One of my most admired politicians in this country is General Mian. When he was a vice president, he almost ended cadreism. And unfortunately, it led to him losing his position. He's the one who introduced the concept of Kambirombiro and Kanakantapa here. Because his thinking was that there must be a diversion. That man was a military man. He had studied military leadership at the highest level possible. So he knew that you can't just be fighting cadres here without giving them something to do. And he created a diversion program under the office of vice president where the youths who had nothing to do were taken for training, agricultural activities, and given small holders in the eastern part of Lusaka. And if that program was replicated countrywide, I am very confident that we could have added candidates. But because he took it as a lone ranger and nobody within the MMD enclave supported him, it didn't succeed. And that's why when he came back to try and set up Heritage Party, he wanted to introduce the village concept. I think that idea, he wanted to grow it and make it a nationwide idea. But unfortunately, politics was gravitating the other way. It is a time that indecency started coming into politics. I've always argued that General Mianda lost his popularity and he failed to become the president because politics had become indecent and he had remained a decent man. And unfortunately, with age, he is not able to continue doing those things. But my thinking is that if he had been allowed to participate, even in the government of Edgar Lungu, in the government of Mwanawasa and Vasat and others, maybe these concepts have helped us to deal with cadreism. But yes, admittedly, we did fail under the leadership of Edgar Lungu to deal with cadres.
All right, great. We have Honorable George Chisanga, who's Lukansha MP, on the program tonight. You can come through as well and be part of the program. Feel free to call in and we'll give you a chance to contribute, comment, or ask a question to the Honorable MP right here. So we are still together for the next couple of minutes, so you can call in right now and contribute on the program. And if at all you have any questions, feel free to ask the Honorable MP here, and you'll be more than ready to answer your questions. Now, Honorable Chisanga, there's one interesting thing that happened. We saw President Edgar Lungu lose elections in 2021, and he handed over, the instruments of power to President HH, who's now our current president. And we saw, surprisingly, former President Edgar Lungu returned to politics. How did that impact the PF?
To be very sincere, if President Lungu did not do what he did on 28th of October 2023, there would be no PF today.
Yes?
No, there wouldn't have been. Maybe some of us would have been independent members of parliament by now.
So he did well to return to politics.
That was a very brave decision. That was a very selfless step. And that, quite frankly, salvaged what you are seeing now as a patriotic front reinforcing itself as a Tonse alliance. Because at that time what happened is that we had wanted to transition our leadership. And we had invested so much in transforming the structure of the party itself so that we could welcome a completely different type of leadership. You know, the type of leadership that we had under Edgar Lungu was leadership that was formed in the opposition with intention to get into government. It remained in government for 10 years and was booted out of power after 10 years. So before we went to the convention, Central Committee and the general membership of the party, the thinking was that we need to transform this party before we create leadership. And that's why you noticed I was appointed to chair a committee to amend, to get views from membership to amend the PF constitution in readiness for a convention we wanted to have on 23rd of October 2023. So we did a lot of work, drafted the constitution, presented to Central Committee, presented to the provincial committees themselves, and everybody had a buy-in to the constitution. We needed then to have two conventions. Okay, the first convention on 23rd of October 2023 should have been a convention to adopt the new constitution. And then we were going to have a convention in March 2024 to elect new leadership, a new president under the new constitutional order that we were going to create. When we discovered, and this is very unfortunate, and I speak with authority, but when we discovered that there was a design by the UPND to disrupt the plans we were putting in place, a decision had then been taken, first to suspend that convention, the constitutional convention, not to elect the president, but to adopt the constitution. We then wanted to shift it to 30th of December, of I think October itself. The thinking was that we didn't want that disrupted. And that is how my younger brother, Mao Sampa, edged himself into it, and took the date that had been scheduled originally for that convention, created his own convention with the assistance of the UPND, okay, and with the assistance of top leadership in UPND, with the assistance of the police command in Lusaka, and he held that convention and installed himself as president of the Patriotic Front in a manner that did not even comply with the existing constitutional order that we have. That convention was itself a farce. Two things happened after that. We then discovered this is a hostile takeover of the party. We need to salvage it. And senior members of the party, decided we need to summon Dr. Lungu to come. Why? Because remember, we had a convention before the 2021 election. That gave Mr. Lungu a tenure of office until 2026. Okay? They told that no, he resigned from active politics. He may have resigned, but he didn't relinquish his presidency of the Patriotic Front, because when he requested Central Committee that he relinquishes the presidency, foreseeing what was going to happen in future, our Central Committee refused to accept his decision to relinquish the position. We told him we can go on leave, but remain in that office until we have a convention, because in any case, our constitution provides that a president is only going to vacate office if we elect another president to take over office. So we told him to stay in office, but he went on leave. And that's what he communicated to the government, because he didn't want to be seen to be in active politics. But with the act of what transpired on 23rd of October 2023, it became inevitable for us to save the PF. And the selfless decision that Dr. Lungu made is what has kept the PF intact up to now. We have continued to be victims of destruction by the UPND up to now. If you are aware, we have taken court cases to court to try and get determination of these matters. We have never gotten any determinate decision from the courts to resolve the Patriotic Front interest. But at least insofar as we are concerned, until his demise, he had remained the president of the party, and he was going to walk us to the next convention. We at the time of his demise, we had almost reached a resolution of the Mao Sampa saga by engagement, because we noticed that the courts were not helping us. Every time we went to court, it's either a case is tossed out for technicalities or the matter is pushed to next year. Like the cases that are in court are coming possibly in January, in June. The other time we were in court in October, the cases were deferred to June this year. So we started getting engagement. And you won't believe it, we've had a lot of very senior historical politicians sitting with us, telling us that, look, PF must be salvaged. Try and do whatever you can do to salvage this party, because this is the biggest opposition political party. And for me, I argue that this is the biggest political party in the country. We were able to persuade our young brother, Miles Sampa, to go and sit with Edgar Chagwa at home and say, look, we need to solve this problem. We need to save this. The courts are not helping. And when you agree in law between the two of you to resolve the matter, the courts have no choice but to agree that you people have agreed. So there's an agreement between Mao Sampa and Edgar Chagwa that we can do a consent order to revert the matters to revert the status of the party to the position it was in before 23rd October 2023. Unfortunately, when those papers were presented in court, the court has had difficulties to append a signature to resolve a simple matter. So we are sitting with an issue where, away from the court, we have resolved. Now has become our brother. You've seen, even now as I'm speaking to you, I just came from Secretariat. He's there with Acting President Given Lubin to show that he's fraternizing with the party. He has no issue whatsoever with the party. He himself made an announcement that he surrendered the presidency back to Edgar Chagwa. So politically,
that's a good thing.
Yes, politically the matters have been resolved. But you see, you need them to follow through with the legal process. So the legal process must respond to the agreement that you have reached by appending a signature by a judge to a consent order and saying, can you now go and resolve that matter? Armed with that consent order, we possibly are going to go back to the registrar of society and say, look, can you now bring back the appropriate people that were notified to you way before as office bearers? But as we go to the convention and we elect new leadership, then we can come and give you the changes that you need to do. Even that is not happening. So the system itself is working against us. But insofar as we are concerned, and for us we know that politics is people. Politics is numbers of people. So the whole country has read that the impasse between Mao Sampa and the Patriotic Front has been resolved. Mao Sampa is now a free member of the PF. He has been welcomed by the family. We are working with him together. If it wasn't for this funeral, would have been in Lumezi preparing. If you notice, he's the one who even escorted the candidate to Lumezi to go and file. Even if, again, we were not being allowed to file as Patriotic Front because there are issues of who are registered office bearers, etc., etc. So, under the auspices of Tonse, we are utilizing other partner members of the Tonse Alliance to file. And we did it in Petauke, we won. We are hopeful that we are winning the Lumezi under the same arrangement. But the point again to make is that here is how selfless Edgar Chagwa was. He had to move away from retirement to come back to come and salvage the party, to come and salvage our position at Mandahill, because we are members of parliament for PF simply because Edgar has come back and sat in that chair until the date of demand.
All right, Honorable Chisanga, due to time, we need to end the program right now.
No problem.
But obviously, what could be your appeal to the Zambian people and the government at large in relation to what is currently happening right now?
I would make an appeal in three ways. Firstly, I would make an appeal to the members of the Patriotic Front to hold their hearts and to reaffirm their faith in God. It is not the first time that we have had a leader die on us. In fact, the previous time was even much more gregarious because the leader who died then was a founding father of the party. But with cooperation, with working together, with putting our heads together, we were able to transition, and we had Edgar Chagwa become our leader. He has moved with us until this time that God has found it.
Just hold your thought. Maybe we can pick up this call even as we are ending the program just under a minute. Hello there.
Hello, Mawombe.
Bueno, Mamombeni.
Vatanga mulishana.
Mwapelenka na mesa mulishana.
Mwila mwa calling from Kitwe.
Ya mister?
Mwila.
Hebu kwa mwila.
Vatanga kulanda kwena ine parwandi.
Hebu kwa.
Mpa.
Hebu kwa.
Kulondolola sio mulelo ndola fintu twamona.
Hebu kwa.
Fintu tuli mona na lero. Sio mulela nda fintu nabe nabo mulebo nabe nabale umpako batine ufuna ishira nango sona tumina iPhone ifo kuchita encourage mubatanga kai mwebo nashukira futi hapa for the first time opo bakwatire chizo mwebo now ndefa fo kumyeba batanga mwabakalamba
emkwane
na papa ata munkumbusha kwa Kristo Yesu amibere olusedeni amikoshe
emkwai
mwikatane
emkwai
bata twikatene baliko twalaya
emkwai
kwena nabakalamba banenu nabambi kurushi nenu
emkwai
mwashebo kutira kaidi bakateka tetukwate 5
emkwai
epo mufiro okulolesha hapo bakateka tetukwate batatu fure twakwata fyo nomba imweba ifwe ba PF tatuli batatu tatuli babiri tatuli uko tuli bengi
sana
so nga twatira kila muntu imwe basanga mufayo okuteka mubeni muba president bachanda bafayo okuteka babeni ba president bakindala bafayo okuteka babeni ba president bakafana bafayo okuteka nabone babeni ba president wala fulungana nomba chondefo kumikosere chitakutila ikatanene kabakatira Chisanga wala ba president tulekonga imwe beni ngatwalatira okay unduvile chenduwe abe polisi mwe bantu mutwikatane tukike unduvile utuine
otorana yes
enkumbonde milombela kulilesa kabumba mkuru
bamwe na totera sana bamwe
ngamwai katana aba bantu tabashupira bene bali chitadi campaign
very true na totera sana.
Thank you so much Mwila for calling. Under 30 minutes Mr. Chisanga, please wrap up.
30 seconds or 30 minutes
30
minutes, thank you. I can do 30 minutes. You see,
you can do even 30 hours.
Mwila has spoken my mind. I was actually making an appeal to the membership of Patriotic Front that this is the first time we've had this tragedy. Unity is what is going to make us move.
Right.
And Mwila has just taken the words out of my mouth. There can only be one leader of the Patriotic at a given time. We are all thinking. We are all, he's used the words, you know, we are examining, all of us, on how we can create this leadership. But if we put unity at the center of everything that we're going to do, everything is going to be okay. An appeal to the other stakeholders, and there's so much indifference on what is happening with the death of Edgar Lungu and the skirmishes between government and the family of the Lungus. I just want to ask the Zambians to pray. This is a very unique situation. This is not an ordinary death. These are not ordinary circumstances. But I'm very convinced that Zambia is a praying country. And when your faith is tested, the level that is being tested right now, the only thing we need to do is to surrender this unfortunate circumstance to God with the expectation that God is going to answer us. You know, for all the Zambians, you know, Mondesa, the president who loved you, he was not a perfect president. One nice thing about President Edgar Lungu is that he even used to admit his follies. At least he was not a man who would stick it out even when he knows he's wrong. He would stick it out. It's only that this has been a short program I've had here. There are times when even I have had to have personal clashes with the president, but there are times when I've come out of those personal clashes excited that I'd convinced him to agree with me, because he's not a man who would stick to his position. So I know the kind of person that we've lost. But let's pray that God can give us somebody who may not have the same kind of traits as Edgar Lungu, but somebody who would want to first respect the Zambian people and respect the fact that they confer on him the duty to manage the affairs of the nation for the period of 5 years, because the next election is in 2026. You know, we just need to pray that we can get for ourselves a president who is going to protect this nation, protect the sovereignty of this nation, a president who is going to respect the institution of government, but most importantly, the president is going to respect this constitution that we've got right now, because this constitution is the only document that can help you govern the country with the expectation and the acceptance of the aspiration of the Zambian people. Right. We are at a worst place, but it is always dark before it's dawn. I think dawn is on the horizon. It is going to show up very soon. Right. God bless this country. May we continue to mourn our president in dignity. May we continue to honor his life and ask that God will receive him in his bosom in the area of glory in heaven. I'm so grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, so I can see the phone is still buzzing, but due to time, we need to end the program right here. Thank you so much to everyone else that has been watching the program, and to the callers, Mr. Mwila, and others that are still calling. Thank you so much for the effort. We appreciate. On behalf of my studio guest, Honorable George Chisanga Lukansha, MP, my name is Ruben Mwanza. Thank you so much.